Together with your university in sociology for some years now, developing a double degree program and so on, and I understand you all are part of this master program. My name is Kjell, this is how it's pronounced, and I will talk today about transformation of the Nordic welfare states. And the welfare state we have in the Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland and so on, have been looked upon as a special version of a societal model, also with a relation to how it also gives opportunities to women. It has been called a women-friendly welfare state. And also that the kind of institutions for welfare have defamilied also the societies, in the sense that women are working and got some economic independence, making it easier to divorce and so on. I will have a quick run through on a little bit of historical development, but also what has happened during the last 30 years, you could say, because the Nordic countries, and my country Sweden, are undergoing a liberal transformation in the welfare state. And I will come back to that. So, for you who are not so familiar about what is the difference between different welfare states in the world, in the Western world or the OECD countries, there are researchers like Gösta Espinjanes and others have differentiated welfare states between what we have in our countries, in the Nordic countries, which is called social democratic welfare states, and in countries like the United States and Canada, Australia, maybe Britain today, liberal welfare states. And in the continental Europe, like Germany, Austria, France, calling it a Christian Democrat or more conservative welfare state. And I can say, I will not go into all these distinctions, but just say that the liberal welfare state is actually where the market plays a bigger role, the state not so big roles. You buy your social insurance like pensions, health insurance and so on the market, right, by insurance companies, while for instance in the Nordic welfare states is provided you by the public sector and so on. I'll get back to that. That's one division. But I will anyway have some bullet points what has been characteristic for the Nordic welfare states, and that is what we call public universal welfare programs. And the concepts of universalism, that welfare programs are universal, it means that all citizens or residents in the country are covered, all are covered. Today we're talking about universalism, welfare states are connected to the nation state. Today we know we have a lot of migration and people who don't even have residence permits who are residing in a country, and they may end up outside it. It's a special problem. But normally it has to do with something we call social citizenship. That as a citizen, or if you have permanent residence, you have a right to welfare. You know that in the United Nations Conventions of Human Rights, there's also one part that is about social and economic rights. And social rights is actually something that you're supposed to have. And if your country signed these conventions, they should implement in legislation so that you, by law, are entitled to certain things like education, healthcare, and so on. We know that that is not always true, even if it's on paper. But the thing here, the point is universal welfare programs, but also that it's not only universal, but the Nordic model is also characterized by that it is organized within the public sector. not the private sector. Also, what is specific typically have been for the Nordic welfare states since the late 50s and 60s is that there is also, apart from the basic benefits like in pensions and health insurance and so on, there's also an income-related component, meaning that when you are not able to work, when you're retired, when you are sick, when you're unemployed, you get benefits in relation to your income. And that has been a very important characteristic, because it means that if you get enough money when you don't work, say when it was at the top in my country, Sweden, when you got 90% of your income when you were sick or unemployed, there is no reason for you to buy private insurance. And that has a sociological consequence that the new middle classes, as we call it, the people like me, university teachers, all these salaried middle classes, they stay in the public system because the public system provides them with compensation for income loss. If you don't have compensation for income loss, you will buy private insurance. And that has sociological effects. We can see what happens is that then those who earn more will start buying private insurance. And then they don't want to pay so much in taxes. And you have a political development that you cut taxes instead, and then you have this dynamic of privatization of all this stuff, right? For instance, like in the United States, the Clinton administration in the 90s tried to implement the universal health insurance reform. He failed. And the reason was that people had privately insured themselves, most of them. And they were not prepared to pay 2 times for the same thing, right? And this is a reversed complex here. And that is a transformation later on I will talk about when it comes to the Scandinavian countries, that when you start lowering replacement rates and don't have income-related benefits, then you see a politics of tax cuts and cuts in public welfare. So people are pushed to the market, right? But this classical system of the Nordic welfare state, when you have everyone included, which this universal system means, it also demands that unemployment is not too high. Because if most people work, it's not so expensive, but if a lot of people don't work, it becomes expensive if you have this system, right? So that also meant that this welfare state system also kind of gave incentive politically to pursue an economic policy to keep employment high. That changed in Sweden, at least, maybe in Denmark before, and Finland, where we joined the EU, because there the main target of economic policy is not to combat unemployment, it is to keep inflation low. So that's a reversal in politics. We talk about regime configuration, or what I'm talking about here is that there are different institutions in society that provide welfare for people. It can be the family, it can be the market, right? It can be civil society and so on, and it can be the public sector, the state, basically. And the Nordic welfare states have been dominated by state provisions. Of course, also families take care of children and so on, but state is very important. Compared to, for instance, continental Europe, the Christian democratic model where the family is more important. Or take the Asian welfare model where family is very important, where grandparents take care of grandchildren and so on. And you can go to Italy, very family-based, right? And then you go to United States, very market-based. we talk about institutional changes, then could say that the start for the Scandinavian countries, at least Denmark, Sweden, Norway, was in relation to the big depression of 1930s. In all these three countries, Finland a little bit outside because they have a different history, but social democratic parties came to power in the 1930s. 1932 I think it was in all three countries. And before that time, social democratic parties, they were socialists in its pure sense, that the recipe they had for reforming society or making social reform or combat unemployment was socialism, nationalization of industry and so on. And as I know more about my country, maybe I know more of Denmark, but I think in all these countries as democracies, there was not in the 1920s, for instance, or beginning of the 30s, there was no majority in parliament of social democrats or communists that would vote for socialization of production. So actually they pursued the same neoclassical economic policy that, right-wing parties. It was the economic dogma of the time. How you run a capitalist society? Well, balanced budgets in the state, right? And when you got unemployment, the revenues from the state went down, and then you cut down even more, and then increased unemployment, etc., right? But what actually it was, I think, the Social Democrats of Scandinavia, I think mainly in Sweden, who came up with the idea, no, this is the wrong way to do things. It was the finance minister, 1932 in Sweden, who said that, well, can we not afford to work? Because this cutting down on expenses also means that people lost jobs. Can we not afford to work because it's depression? Strange, isn't it? So we actually put an appendix to the first budget that they did, 1932, saying that no, during depressions, when there is a crisis, then the government should spend more money than its revenues, because then you will stimulate the economy so that it will grow again. Does it sound familiar? There came a guy called John Maynard Keynes who wrote a book in 1936 that actually became the most famous economist, in the 20th century, I would say, whose policy was dominating Western economic policy from the 1940s up until the 1970s. It's called Keynesianism. Stimulating the economy, and the state need to do it when you have crisis, right? And he was very inspired by Scandinavian social democracy with these ideas. So, small countries, but big influence on, ideology and politics. I have a bullet point here also during the Depression called cow deals. Cows, it is cattle who you drink milk from. But it's also the case that in Europe at that time, in Germany, they elected Hitler as chancellor, prime minister, right? In Italy, it was Mussolini's fascists. So Nazi and fascists. And it was farmers and these kind of things who sided with these fascist parties. But like in Scandinavia, we never had any Nazis or fascist parties in parliament during this time. And one of the reasons was that during this depression, the working class was losing their job. They got unemployed, but the farmers also lost their farms. They went bankrupt because the prices of the farm products went down. So there was actually a deal, a coalition between the Farmers' Party and the Social Democratic parties in all these three countries, Denmark, Norway and Sweden. I think it started in Denmark in the beginning of 1933, and one of the things they actually wrote an agreement on was the price of beef, to kind of keep the price of beef up. That's why it's called cow deals, and the same deals between farmers and working class parties formed in Norway and Sweden. In American language, we call it pork barreling. That okay, if you Farmers Party accept that we get unemployment benefits and relief works, public works to unemployed workers, we save your farmers from going bankrupt, basically. So they made a form of coalition with farmers. And then also there was compromises with capital in 1936, which meant actually that the government told the big business owners that if you don't continue to try to kick us out or obstruct the economy and so on, we will not socialize you, we will keep you private, but your duty is to produce economic growth, and you should allow trade union to organize, and you should allow us to take out taxes for social reform. The kind of historical compromise, it was called. And also that was followed up by 1938 by trade union leaders and business leaders meeting and regulated industrial relations, so that how you negotiate wages, collective bargaining, when you're allowed to take action like lockouts and strikes. Before that time, Sweden was famous for having the most strike days or labor market conflicts in the whole Western world almost, but then became very peaceful, sitting around the table instead, negotiating and signing agreements instead of striking, basically. But I come back to this also. What is important here, farmers, there were an alliance with farmers and Social Democrats and the left up until the late 50s. But you know that farmers, at least in modern societies, they decrease in numbers. With maybe in Scandinavia now, 3-4% of the population are in agriculture. Maybe a little bit more in Denmark, who's an agricultural society, but not much to build a political coalition on. Not many votes. And at the same time as agricultural population decreased, the new middle classes, like teachers, nurses, university teachers, etc., all these people growing in numbers, social services and services overall. And what the Social Democrats managed to do in Scandinavia was to form a new alliance with them. And the key to that was what I mentioned, these income-related benefits in social insurance and so on. And without that, it would not have been possible. And Sweden is maybe the best example of these alliances, because Social Democratic Party was in government and had the prime minister post uninterruptedly from 1932 to 1976. It's unheard of in a democratic country, I think, apart maybe possibly from Japan, who has partly rigged the election system. Okay. Here I will have many slides. I will not go too deeply into it, but one thing that was important in the 30s was that population was decreasing because of the depression. And there was two famous persons, not famous for you, but was at that time Gunnar and Alva Myrdal, who got the assignment of actually making a government investigation into these issues. How can you increase population or stimulate childbirth? And it was not so severe like Ceausescu's, Romania, where it's forbidden with abortion and so on. But actually, it was actually arguments for social welfare reform. Actually, make it more affordable for families to have children, with child allowance, with different kinds of benefits to have families. One thing was interesting also, that Alva Myrdal, by the way, also proposed what you, Svetlana, talked about earlier, common kitchens, collective housing. And there were some experiments in Stockholm in the 30s, partly maybe inspired by Soviet Union, I imagine. But it was kind of the same ideas. But anyway, this nativist, or this that population was decreasing, they even managed in the 30s to convince some of the conservative parties that A bigger population is important. Conservative parties with big population, more soldiers, more power, even if we were not in war, but still. Yeah, there was a maternity grant that was connected to this investigation. But then in 1937 too, then it became illegal to fire women when they married. You could do that before that. And you also got some maternity assistance, benefit for single mothers introduced in 1938. But still, the real volume of welfare state is first after the Second World War. I will say that in 1948, poverty was abolished from the elderly, because then the pension was raised so that they come above the poverty line. So immediately the poverty went to zero in that group. But that was flat rate benefits. Everyone got the same pension. And I show this that because it's not so important in the sense flat rate, but it means that this was related to the alliance with the farmers. Because both working class and farmers, they didn't have much wages, didn't have so high salary, at least not the farmers what they reported. So they were happy with the basic level, same for all. But then comes the turn here. It actually split a government coalition between Farmers' Party and the Social Democrat Party here in 55 to 59, because then came the idea of a supplementary pension that would make it income related. And there was 2 elections and 1 referendum on this issue in the 1950s. And the thing is with the referendum, it's kind of interesting to know, because it's symbolic. It is that the referendum, there was three proposals put on the referendum. None of the 3 got 50%, but the Social Democratic proposal had the biggest one, but less than 50%. They claimed they won, but the other parties said that, on the liberal right-wing party said, no, we won because we together are bigger. But they didn't agree. And this Social Democratic proposal was that it should be compulsory supplementary pension and organized within the public sector. By the other parties on the right, they wanted it to be voluntary, maybe put on the market, and some different kinds of other structures. But then there was a new election again to solve the issue, and the parliament was even numbers. So there became exactly 50% in favor of the Social Democratic proposal, exactly 50% against. So what happened? Well, one member of the Liberal Party abstained from voting. So the Social Democratic proposal won. He, of course, the Liberal, he was kicked out of his party. He was a traitor, right? But he was something more. He was also a trade union official in an office, new middle class at the shipyard in Gothenburg. And he was, and it was like we have a special trade union confederation for the middle classes. The working classes have there, and so on. And they were discussing it, and they supported this Social Democratic proposal. So it was the organized middle classes who actually joined in with this, and this created this alliance between working class and middle class. So that's a recommendation for you that, well, we don't have much social welfare policies and so on here, but if you have income-related policies, then you create maybe an alliance, if everyone gets in relation to income. I don't talk more about that, but that is a finding that welfare researchers have done in comparative research and so on. And if you do like that, inequality will be less, poverty will be less than when you only target tax money on the poor. Sounds paradoxical, but that's how it works in practice. Yeah, then comes the 60s, and here comes the women entering the labor market, because there was an expansion of the public sector, and mostly those who were employed in the public sector were women. It was in in schools, hospitals, etc. Can also say that also later on in the 60s, the women's movement, of course, pushed for also that they wanted an income and to work. But at the time of the 60s in Scandinavia, and I know Sweden very well, it was also industry was demanding that women come to work because we had a shortage of labor. We imported labor from Southern Europe, and also industry wanted women to come to work. And also the labor market parties, trade unions and employers, they abolished those specific agreements they had where women had lower wages than men. A bit unfair, but that was abolished. Still, women have a bit lower wages than men, but it's not only agreements at least. They started slowly expansion of daycare, child allowances also. But also, of course, the women's movement criticized, of course, why do we only have maternal leave? We have fathers, right? So we should have parental leave, and that is coming on. Because here in the 70s, now I'm focusing on Sweden, sorry Denmark, because I'm just an example. Because like what is expanding really much during the 70s, 60s was healthcare and schools and education, but in the 1970s and up to the 80s, that was actually something that benefited women when it comes to economic independence. Because that social services like also childcare and elderly care, like institutional care, was expanded dramatically. And what very important too was that we got individual taxation 1971. Because that is very important, because at this time we had progressive taxation, meaning that if you earn more, you pay more in percent. You higher up you come when you pay taxes. And that meant that if the man in the household worked and had a good income, and the woman started working, then when you have a tax on the family as a whole, the whole household, it means actually the extra income you get when the woman is working, much of it goes away in tax. And for instance, in a country like Germany today, it still is family taxation. And you also see that a smaller proportion of women are working also. So individual taxation means that even if you are married to a billionaire and you start working, you pay taxes in relation to your own income, not your husband's or anyone else. And in 1973, it was legislated that all children should have access to public childcare, kindergarten. It was during the regime of Olof Palme who decided that, and it was very influenced by his wife, I think. She was actually working a lot with children and was a social scientist as well, Lisbeth. Yeah, parental insurance then, 1974, it's not maternal insurance, maternal leave anymore. Parental insurance means also that when you stay home with your child, when it's a small baby, you get, at that time, 80-90% of the income. And that is for both parents now. I can say that it's easier to get women out to the labor market than to get fathers into the household to take care of children. Because still today, in Sweden, 75% of the time for the parental leave is taken out by the mothers. They have tried to kind of affect that by giving, I think now 3 months earmarked for the parent who is, taking the least parental leave, normally the fathers. So it have increased a little bit, but still, most of it is taken. It's also the case that it's the more educated people who actually have more parental leave for fathers. Working class is more than the mothers do. We got free abortion in 1974. Before that, Swedish women to make abortion, they went to Poland. At that time it was free abortion in Poland. Now it's forbidden in Poland and allowed in Sweden. Reversed order. Yeah. We had a gender equality law in 1978. That's more to do with legislation that you should not discriminate in relation to jobs or salaries and so on between men and women. I will say something also that, because it's anniversary this month, that 19 October 1979, homosexuality was deleted as a sickness in Sweden. It's only 40 years ago. It was a mental sickness before. I will show you a picture on how this was done. Next slide. I'll just say that this legislation 1973 to guarantee all childcare to all children, it was fully expanded and so on, so that in 1985 they have built all these daycare centers and educated kindergarten, school teachers and so on. It was fully covered, so all children basically after that go to basically publicly financed childcare. Here is, I said in October, homosexuality was abolished as a sickness, but there was a demonstration 29 August, a little bit before that, 79, and this person here, she is the head of the Swedish National Board of Health and Welfare. And the demonstrators who wanted was fighting for homosexual rights, and actually that it was totally insane, this with having them as declared sick, they occupied the staircase of this agency. And not only that, what they also did, a lot of people around the country, as you know, we have a good health insurance, so that when you report sick, you get 90% of your income. And a lot of people, they report they're sick and say that I feel homosexual today, so I go on sick list. And that was a kind of huge, organized event. So more than 1 or 2 months later, they did it. So homosexuality is no longer sickness. I can say also it was actually criminal until 1944. Then it was decriminalized. So what the effects of building up this public sector, or this institutional social services that liberated women from family dependence and defamilize, the society. You can see that it expanded women in labor market quite a lot. 1970 was 60% and 82. And there is not much difference between the labor market participation between men and women today. But there is a lot more women working part-time, especially when children are small. And also we have, in Sweden at least, we have a very segregated labor market. Women are working in the public sector, in the social services. Much more men in industry. So we can say that the expansion of women employment is dependent on the public sector to a large degree. Well, unemployment we didn't have until 1990. It's a new phenomena where we transform the policies. So this was his very fast historical rundown on building up the Swedish welfare state and also how it's related to the women and the relation between men and women. It's also, that when women start working in the labor market, we can also see in our countries that it's easier to divorce, and we have a high divorce rate. At least during this time, you didn't have to stay with a husband who is bad or you don't love him more. You could actually afford to leave. One thing I want to show with this slide, it's important to know when it comes to social policy or the welfare state, because one additional question is, what does a welfare state do? Apart from the social services who make it possible for women to work and so on. It also redistributes resources and income. That was the main thing. And you can say that social insurances, that is pensions, health insurance, unemployment insurance, parental insurance, redistributes. Partly also social services redistribute resources. At least earlier, working class used hospitals, healthcare more, which means actually they get more out of it. But when it comes to university education, the upper class uses more. So it depends on which system it is when it comes to social services. And I will mention too that schools, university education and so on, healthcare is basically for free in the Scandinavian countries. Has been at least. But here, if you look at, this has to do with, this here, before taxes and transfers, before TNT, that you can say that is the primary distribution of income from work. And there, the figures are the Gini coefficient. Do you all know what the Gini coefficient is? Okay. It's a measurement of distribution of income in a society, measurement of inequality. If one person in a society have all the income, then the figure is 1.0. That person is very rich, the rest starve to death. Right? If you have 0.0, everyone earns the same amount of money. We haven't seen any country, not even Soviet Union had 0.0, I imagine. But so it is between something like, for a capitalist country, the lowest figure for this Gini coefficient had been 0.2 something. And that is the Nordic countries around 1980. We were the same as Cuba actually at that time. But the thing is that if you look at the left-hand column, you can see that the figure is fairly high. 0.446 for 0.4 is a very unequal distribution of income. But you can see after taxes and transfers that it decreases dramatically. Which means actually social insurance transfers like pensions, health insurance, unemployment insurance, all these kind of things, do redistribute income in the country. This is a net redistribution after taxes and transfers. And as far as I understand the research, it's actually transfers more than taxes itself that actually affect inequality the most. But of course you need taxes or some other things for getting these transfers. I will say this figures here is higher. This is 2012. In 1980 it was 0.20, 0.22 something in these countries. So inequality is increasing. Well, here's just a slide. It's not important for you, but if you have any people interested in economy, this is to show that mainstream economists, you may have heard, if you have studied economy in your life, saying that, well, to have high taxes and big welfare states, it's not compatible with a productive, healthy economy. It's not good for economic growth. It's not good for being competitive on the world market and so on. That is by theory, by economists, but the theory is wrong. The empirical evidence is the opposite. It actually doesn't matter what kind of welfare state you have. It doesn't matter if you have high taxes or if you have expensive welfare state when it comes to competitiveness. It depends on other factors. I will not go into that now. But if you look at this table, say for different years, but it shows the structure that the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Denmark down here and Norway, constantly are the top 10 most competitive countries on the world market. And this is not the left-wing think tank that have done these tables. It is World Economic Forum, these guys, powerful guys who meet in Davos, Switzerland every year. They make a ranking every year of this. I will not tell you how they do the rankings, but this is the case. So don't believe people who say that welfare state and healthy economy is not compatible. It depends on other factors, and it would take too long to explain it. But we now look at how is the relation between gender relations and welfare. Well, what we see in the Nordic countries is that the employment rate is high. Not so much difference between men and women, but part-time is more common, and also more caring work is done by women, a little bit like double work, a little bit like USSR, maybe. And also, service sector for women. But the ideal is to earn a family, and to earn a family also is very much related to that we have this individual taxation. To have one income, you need two incomes basically. You can do with one, but better with two. There is a large number of single parent families, single mothers, most of them, and they have relatively low income. I can say this with family structures in the Nordic countries. It's not typical that we have a nuclear family, mother, father, and children. We have a lot of other family constellations. We have, as you say, single parent, mostly single women. We have what we call bonus families. We have people remarry, and if you're married, you have, my wife have some children, I have some, and we have one together. This kind of mix is very common too, right? And there's no stigma to be a single parent. It's quite okay to find a new partner. They don't dislike you because of it. I worked in China. There it's much more difficult to be a single mother. The men don't like it. They don't want it. Poverty level. I will show you a slide on that next slide. There is or has been a limited gap of income in old age because of the pension system. But we have changed pension system the last 20 years or so, which means that it's constructed in a way that we will get more poor old women in the future. That's part of the neoliberal term. I'm not going into details about it, but it's already discussed that it will get worse. Here is a table from 1980s. I have taken it from a very classical article by Walter Kopi and Joachim Palme, who wrote an article in 1998. It was titled "The Paradox of Redistribution," and it's related to what I said earlier, that when you have income-related benefits and include the affluent middle class in the same system as the working class, you will have less inequality and less poverty. They call it a paradox, because when benefits are income related, those people who earn more, I earn more than factory workers. I get more from the welfare state with social insurance when I'm sick before, when I was unemployed, not anymore, but now. So it seems unfair. But the paradox is that comparing all countries, I think they compared OECD countries, the inequality was less and the poverty was less when you have this system I'm talking about. And that has to do with the fact that when you buy private insurance, have a market-based social benefits instead of these income-related public ones, these distribute even more unequally. And another factor is also that reluctance to pay taxes or social insurance contribution is much less. So what is recommendable is that Robin Hood principle is not so beneficial for the poor. in the long run, at least. It's actually the Three Musketeer principle that is most beneficial for the poor in the long run. You all know the Three Musketeers? Yeah, you know, all for one for all. Because you create solidarity. Very important in sociology that you can get this solidarity. So you have a majority to vote for this. Because like when only a minority of poor people rely on public benefits, the majority will vote for decreasing these benefits, right? I have a colleague at my department who made his dissertation on conditional cash transfers in Latin America, kind of social benefits for poor people in Latin America. He did it in Uruguay and Guatemala, and when he did his research, there was a left-wing government in Uruguay, old guerrilla from who was underground during the military dictatorship then. And he also talked to the Research Institute and so on there. And he recommended them to say that because they were targeting the tax money they had or what they wanted to do, targeted the benefits to only the poor. And he said it's not a good idea. You will not get majority support in the long run for that. You should rather have universal child allowances for everyone, rich and poor. I don't know what this left-wing government said or their advisor said. Hell no. Should we give benefits to those who killed us and put us in jail before? No way. He wrote an article in a Spanish magazine about this topic, saying that, well, we know from research that Three Musketeer principle is better. And he's right. They lose power in the end also. And also targeted only to the poor and not have universal systems also invite corruption because then you target those who you want to vote for you and so on. For instance, in Latin America. But to this one, here is actually in the 1980s. Here is the Gini coefficient of inequality. You see it's very low at this time. And I can compare that with liberal welfare states like US or the Christian Democrats like Germany and so on. It's the lowest inequality. But also this figure says poverty. These figures to the left here is poverty, how it's measured for all the population. But the most interesting from a gender aspect is the figures within brackets. That is poverty rate among single mothers. And as you can see, apart from Norway, the poverty rate is not higher for single mothers than if you're not a single mother. And this is an example of that you can actually afford to divorce. You can survive, right? But in most other countries, say the Christian Democrat, but also the liberal welfare state, the poverty rate goes up very heavily if you become a single mother, if you divorce. That's it. Norway is here deviating a little bit, and that has to do with, for instance, that it's difficult to find childcare and so on for, I think, in Norway until children are 3 years old. In Sweden, Denmark, and so on, I think we put children there by 1 year or something like that, after parental leave and so on. Wow. Yeah, Walter Kopi is not together with Palme this time, but he wrote an article in year 2000 about how different welfare policies, how they shape, or different, how different countries are ranked in relation to what kind of gender policies or family policies they pursue. And the left-hand column is what is called general family support. If we take, for instance, these Christian democratic or conservative welfare states, Germany, Belgium, or whatever we have, they put public subsidies or support into programs that support the nuclear family, traditional family structure, so that you get benefits when you have more children. You have tax deductions for men, basically, when they have children, and so on and so forth. It's actually promoting the traditional family. Belgium, Germany, France, even Norway may be surprising, and Italy and so on. They do that. Sweden, Denmark, Finland, not so interested in promoting the nuclear family. And down here, Netherlands is a bit surprising maybe for you. It's low on this one because normally it's considered conservative. Here is the liberal countries. They don't put much public money into any welfare system. That's why that's liberal. They are down on the list on both columns. But in the right-hand column, that is ranking of countries who promote the most to actually activate and promote women to work and actually promote what COP is called dual earning model, dual earning support. But you know all that already. And there you can see Sweden, Denmark, Finland and Norway. They're on top of the list. The interesting with Norway is that they put in, they have social programs for both sides. And that depends on that in Norway they had during this time also a Christian party who was wanting to have some family protection, right? So they're a bit schizophrenic over there. But then you can see France also are top of the both lists. They also have dual policy, but in France also women are working quite a lot. So these continental countries, they differ quite substantially. But there is a relation between gender regimes and what we call these welfare regimes in general. But it's not always that what we call liberal, social democratic or conservative models exactly coincides with the gender regimes. Gender regimes can be different. You can say Netherlands, for instance, they normally are considered to be not very progressive when it comes to gender aspect of their policies, but they are fairly social democratic when it comes to social insurance, social protection, economic issues, but not so good in providing social services. Here's a table. I can show you one thing is that it's the same article. But what Copy want to show here is that the kind of gender policies or family policies that has been pursued by these different countries is connected to the political forces that has dominated politics and governments since 1946 to 1985. And they have an index of power in this index. They count the number of years that a political party have been in government from 1946 to 1995. But they also weight it with how many government portfolios do they have. If you have a coalition government, 50-50 between two parties, then you'll get 50% of the power and so on, right? And they make an index of that to try to show how much influence have these parties had on policy. And it seems, according to his result, that politics does matter, at least in the OECD countries. Because like if you look at Ireland on the top, that's an example. Confessional party, it means 95% of the time and the weight has been a religious party, Catholic party, in government. Conservative, centrist, that is what say United States, both Democrats and Republicans at this time is considered to be, conservative or centrist. And then you have left-wing parties, communist parties, socialist parties, social democratic parties, right? And here you can see what kind of gender regime comes out of this politics. And if you do a regression on this one, you can see there is an absolutely clear relation between what political forces have been in power and what kind of gender regimes comes out in the end. If we take, I've lost Sweden, but it doesn't matter. Sweden. Well, cut off. Sweden is down here too. You could say that it's very low level of religious parties having any power. Apart from Norway, there is a Christian Democratic Party that is Protestant, not Catholic like in continent. Today, since some years, we have a Christian Democratic Party in Sweden too, and that has affected gender policy too, but not during this time we're talking about here. What you can see here is also that left-wing parties had a big influence on government power, and that has promoted dual earner model. And if you look at the United States, you have 100% of liberal right-wing politics, and you have a more market-oriented politics, and you can see the relation here, how it fits together. Yeah.
Could you a little bit elaborate what does it mean market-oriented policy in terms of gender policy? So it's more or less understandable what is family support, what is dual earner, but what does it mean this market?
It means that that the ambitions of government to launch social services or welfare benefits is low, and that means in gender perspective that people rely on market and family, and normally a country like US are saying, when talking about welfare mix or this configuration of institutions providing welfare, when the state is not so active or intervening, the family need to come in, right? If you're rich, you can buy it on the market, but to get childcare and so on might be expensive and so on for those who are poorer. They need family members to step in. So that's the relation. So market-oriented mean actually market and family, I would say. Yeah, okay. Here is to show also at this time in the 1980s, the difference in labor market participation between men and women. It's not that big. It's a little bit more, bigger proportion of men working on labor market than women. In Norway's deviance here has to do with what I said, that they stay home until children are roughly 3 before they go to kindergarten, and that creates these statistics. Otherwise, Norway is a very gender equal society as well. They were the first country who had 50% of government ministers, women and men. I will say something also about the concept of social care. Care, well, I will not define care, but you roughly know what it is, I suppose. But when we talk about social care, then we are talking sociology, because when we talk about social care, it's care who is organized in an institutional specific way. If care is conducted within the family, that's one kind of social institution that do care. If you organize care in public childcare centers, it's another social institution. So this differs, right? And also how care is conducted in relation to economy and institutions also have effects for how the relation is between generations. And that's why I have the first bullet point here, in the first bullet points, because Svetlana earlier today said that the state replaced the men as patriarchy. Some feminist writers also say that the Nordic welfare state also is that women become dependent on the state, not the families or men. It's a bit similar, right? But I can tell you also that in 1956, okay, I'll start with this. Then the children did not have to pay the cost for caring for elderly. If the elderly went into old people's home and so on, institutions, then the children did not have to pay for it anymore. But maybe even more interesting is that in 1978, all legal obligations between generations were taken away. It means actually that I don't have to, I have no legal responsibility to take care of my old parents. In China, it's totally different. Then there's legislation saying that you must take care of your elderly parents. When I was teaching about this in China for Chinese students, I said, "Oh, what a cold society! You don't care about your elderly. Horrible country you have." But actually, my parents, they were fighting politically. They were active social democrats. I said, "No, we will want a good pension. We will actually want to be independent on our old age. We want our children to visit us when they want to, not when they have to." Right? So it's different cultures, a little bit, created by these institutional differences. Can also say that when children become 18 years of age, parents have no legal obligation to take care of them either. They are considered to be full-fledged grown-ups, independent. And they can, borrow money, they can go to social assistance office, even if the parents earn a lot of money, etc., etc. That doesn't mean that the generation do not support each other in our countries. It's not legally binding. I remember when I was a student and I talked to my German friends who were students too in Germany, and they told me that they got scholarships for financing their university studies if the parents did not earn over a certain limit. But if they had affluent parents, then they didn't get scholarships. But the parents had to pay. And I asked them, well, if the parents don't pay then, your living costs and so on, we can take them to court. I don't think in Denmark we can do that. Not in Sweden too. Spouses. Man and wife, or nowadays same-sex marriage and so on. Spouses, there is a different relations. You have individual taxation, you have the right to your own pension and so on. But when it comes to the lowest social network, that is social assistance or welfare checks, what they call it. There, if you live together or you're married or something like that, then if your spouse have a lot of money and property and so on, then the social assistance office will not give you money. So there are some obligations between spouses, but not between generations. But all this intergenerational independence, legally at least, that depends, of course, on the whole social service structure. Someone else needs to take care of it if necessary. And that is the public sector, or the taxes need to take care of it. Childcare, elderly care, pensions, etc. And the study allowances for students. Or borrow money or something. Yeah. Of course, this removal of formal obligations changes the relation between state and individual. Some say that Scandinavia, and maybe Sweden specifically, is the most individualistic country in the world. Not the United States. which is sometimes call themselves the most individual freedom at the top. They're not. In the United States, they even interfere in the bedroom. You know that Clinton was actually impeached for refusing to tell who he had sex with, right? Could not be done. No, but this individualism has to do with women especially, that the state and the public sector and all these institutional care services have actually given women individual freedom. Individual freedom from the family. But the backside of this is, of course, what's happening now when the government is cutting down on social expenditure. Then you have the state, the patriarch, attacking you. Older seldom rely on family members for practical helps. That is changing now because the transformation or the cuts in the Swedish welfare state and elderly care has suffered quite a lot. It means that family members, mostly women, have to step in more. And it has gone so far that quite a number of women have had to go down to part-time jobs, sometimes finished jobs, or work so much that they work themselves sick. So we are talking about there is a tendency to re-familization because of it. The last item there is that it's very unusual that elderly live with their children. It normally never happens, I think. The normal thing, Denmark is different, but in Sweden, in Sweden we have what is elderly until they get very sick. They live in their own apartments, normal apartments, and they get home help. The municipalities or the cities provide tax finance, cleaning, cooking, shopping, and so on, right? I think it's more common.
It's the same in Denmark.
Same, yeah. Because earlier you had more institutional 24 hours with old people's homes more.
Yeah, they're trying to make it more and more in people's homes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's only when you're very, very sick that you get a spot in a retirement home.
Okay, coming closer to Sweden then, yeah. Yeah, defamiliation. I was actually, in relation to your question, Svetlana, that Christian Democratic favors models to strengthen family structure, the traditional family. And here you have the liberal, who rely on private insurance. I should write family here too. Right. It's a repetition. Here's an old chart. Why I thought that Denmark, at least earlier, had more institutional care, because what Rauch does in this article, he has on this axis, here's elderly care, here's child care. The index, how we measure it, is both coverage and intensity. Coverage is how big proportion of the elderly or the children is covered by these social services. And intensity is how many hours per day. And what we see up here is Denmark, up in this corner. Very high score on for both elderly care and child care at this time, when they measured it. While Sweden is down here. Fairly okay when it comes to child care, but not very heavy on elderly care. And what I understand as explanation at this time is that the intensity is lower in Sweden, because when you have this home help, home services, it's some hours, for those who are not really sick, it's some hours per day where they clean and cook and so on. While when you have institutional care, 24 hours, old people's home, then you have intensity 24/7, right? So it's a bit tricky. But here you have the opposite. Deutschland, that's Germany. They score low on each place. Finland, Netherlands, Norway. But it's a way to see a kind of institutional structure somehow. This is quite old, so it has happened a lot. Now we come to a new transformation. I've been talking about how it was. I'm talking about how it become. We have had neoliberal policies, I think, in all Nordic countries since the 1980s. They started, you know, in England and the United States and so on, already in the 70s. So we delayed this political turn because of, we didn't like it. But I talk about Sweden now, and I think maybe you can relate to Denmark maybe. Financial deregulation, that means that before the mid of the 1980s, the central bank regulated how much money the banks could lend to people. Also regulated how much money you could take out of the country, currency deregulation. And it means actually that then banks could create as much money as I wanted to. You know today that money is created by banks, not by states. They're created by banks, by lending money to people. And that is make it very vulnerable for financial crisis. I think in Sweden, 97% of all money is created by banks. Because they give you a loan and you put it in your bank account and you just switch this account and so on. And then the bubbles go up in worst case. State very little control anymore, even on currencies and on finance. And this deregulation, and I don't talk about the policies, resulted in a huge crisis in Sweden in the 1990s, 92. Because in 1990, Sweden decided that we should apply for membership of the European Union. At the same time, we connected the Swedish krona, the money, to European currencies, called the ECU at that time, European Currency Unit. It was not the euro, it was kind of fixed values between several European currencies, right? But it was a fixed value. And Sweden export a lot to the dollar area. We sell in dollars, you know, tree and the pulp and the paper and all that. And the dollar went down. And in 1992, the central bank tried to defend the krona, so we had 500% interest rate. And unemployment went up from nothing to 12%. And deficit in the state budget, enormous. And the employment rate fell from 83 to 75%, and actually abolished all the growth in employment since the 1970s, when the women moved out to the labor market. But at this time, it was not the public sector was hit first, it was the industry, so the men had to leave here. Now today, women is more in trouble. And we have an average EU unemployment today. We don't differ. We didn't have any unemployment until 1990. Now we are actually not good at all. We have 7-8% of open unemployment, constantly. Second item here. What I did then, lower replacement rate in social insurance systems. That is unemployment benefits, health insurance, etc. Sickness pay. I will come back to the consequences of that. Relief work, that was for unemployed. And they also legislated, this was actually a conservative government, 91 to 94. Carl Bildt was prime minister. So he presided over the biggest crisis we had in the economy since the Second World War. But they introduced the voucher system, a kind of market system. Schools and so on was still tax funded, but parents, pupils and others, they got a credit card. Here you have a price on the head of your child. Go and shop a school and we pay. That system was legislated at that time, but it grew in volume and is now a full-fledged system today with very, very severe results. So here is some of these things I did. just in these crisis years. I will not go into pension reform, liberalized it so that it became a different pension system, which will create more poverty among women in the future. Cuts in social insurances, higher fees. But actually, we at universities, we benefited from the crisis because when unemployed young people, they send it to us in universities and they gave us money to teach them. So when we have a crisis in economy, university go up. Not here, but in Sweden we do. That's quite interesting. Social policy, 2006 was an important year because then a liberal conservative government took over after Social Democrats, who got back after Carl Bildt's failure, so to speak. And they actually managed to be re-elected 2010 and actually governed longer than they never had ever done since 1932. I'll explain why. They launched a program to really transform the welfare state. In 2007 already, they smashed the unemployment insurance so that you had to pay higher fees and the compensation rates went down, and also much more difficult to qualify for it, how long time you had to work and so on. I think, and that is result today, is that only a third of people working, or a third, are actually included and get reasonable unemployment benefit of 80%. Because what they've done also during social democratic governments before, is that they have frozen the roof how much you can get in absolute numbers. And when salaries are increasing, the compensation rate, the percentage go down. So people start buy private insurance. Right? Same thing in a pension. When it was the old pension system that you got maybe 70-80% of your income as pension, now it's down for people like me if I don't, well, employment insurance, but those who don't have employment insurance or also private insurance, they get maybe 40-50%. So people start buying private insurance as an addition to the decreasing what they get from public sector. And this has huge results, because this means that what the government did here 2006 to 14 was at the same time they took the money from social insurance funds every year, put it to tax cuts. So people got more in pocket in tax cuts. But at the same time, if you got unemployed and sick, you were in trouble. So people buy insurance. And you know that they are smart people also. This kind of social policy lessons, it's not only that you know how the system works with Robin Hood or the Three Musketeers. If you want to reduce inequality and poverty, you know how to do it if you're a social scientist maybe. But also the right-wing politicians, they're smart too. They read our research too. Say, aha, but if we reverse it, we lower compensation rates, we cut down here, but also what has been done is we cut down quality on healthcare so that you get a long line, to wait for operations so the quality deteriorates. Private provisions will expand. And that's what they have done. And that is also why they got re-elected 2010. Because they actually did this switch. So you see that this relation between income-related benefits and how the social benefits and so on are constructed affects politics, how people vote. Yeah. So, still we have free healthcare, schools, and so on, tax paid, but a lot of money goes now to institutions who are privately run, even it's financed by taxes, childcare centers, schools, or whatever, for profit mainly. I will say something just to explain what this is. Social corporatism has characterized, I think, all Scandinavian countries. It is that much of the regulation of policy have been a kind of cooperation between state, trade unions and employers to kind of negotiate. But that system have collapsed, especially because the employers and the industry have opted out. They got so much power. They nowadays use as political influence lobbyism instead. They put a lot of money into lobbyism and actually also offering.
I don't know what lobbyism is. Can you explain it, please?
It is what people do, for instance, very famously in Brussels and Washington, D.C. They have lobby firms and they go to parliament and to political figures to try to convince them to do like they want. Industry lobbyism, for instance, pharmaceutical companies, other companies, US, spend billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars to influence politics. And they finance, well, in the United States, they finance, politicians' election campaigns and so on. I would call it bribery. But sometimes it's illegal, sometimes not. Well, that's lobbies. To lobby, to influence.
I would say to promote some interest through the politics.
Yeah. In Sweden, I think that in Brussels or in the United States, you must actually disclose if you're a lobbyist. But it's my country, it's behind closed doors many times too. And also we have younger and younger politicians in high official positions, like in government and in parliament. And they seem often to get jobs in the private sector after they have finished their career. Defense minister worked for the defense industry after, etc., etc. Which means actually that sometimes they seem to represent the future employer more than the voters. Maybe that's not called lobbyism, but there is an article I will show you that you can read if you want. Yeah, inequality have been growing. And when measuring with Gini coefficient, this 28, that is for salary income. But capital gains has been more important. It's actually that you earn money from capital, you own capital, and then the inequality is bigger. But what I point to is that wealth in a country like Sweden is very concentrated. The richest 10% own 67% of the wealth, property, companies, and so on. So compared to other countries, maybe salary income is not so unequal, it's increasing, but the wealth is very concentrated, especially in Sweden, who is big capital. I think it's more distributed in Denmark.
Taxes of heritage?
Yeah, we don't have taxes on heritage, but but talking about ownership, wealth.
Yeah.
I think
in Denmark, you cannot inherit a company or a house. You will then have to pay 15% of its value, which means that it gets more and more equally distributed when you don't just pass things on through generations. I wondered if you have that in Sweden.
You follow Piketty. We don't in Sweden. We have abolished all wealth tax. We have abolished inheritance tax. We have abolished what's it called? 3: wealth tax, inheritance tax, and it may even property tax on real estate and so on. We are a tax haven for rich people in Sweden now. Yeah, I can tell you rich people in Denmark from Sweden, we've got no taxes. It's like in Ukraine. So it's changed a lot. We have actually, when it comes to wealth and inheritance and so on, we are worst in Western Europe in the EU in that case. Yeah, well, Ireland and so on is also tax havens, basically. They don't have to go to Cayman Islands or. Yeah, when it comes to low income measure, 60% of median, that is an EU measurement of low income, and actually that has been growing. It was 13% of 2009, and among children of single parents, it's increasing. poverty line is one thing, but this poverty line we measure like those who go to social assistance office, but this 60% that EU uses, but you see they are vulnerable. And 20 years ago, very few, if any, was here. So poverty, you can say, is growing too. Oi, time is running out. Okay, privatization of the welfare state. Primary health, 42% run by privately owned clinics. In Stockholm, 65%. Here is very interesting when it comes to schools, 90% of these schools who are private, 20% of the schools are private, but almost all of them are for profit. They get tax money and make profit. Sometimes move it out to offshore places. And it's big equity firm, risk capitalists who are investing in this. It's not small. It's not small self-owning schools and this kind of things that has been common in Denmark. And this is a very hot issue debated now, and the school system have really gone down the drain. School results for school children have gone down. If you want to read a little article about lobbying and for profits and this kind of things, but because like what Stefan Svalfors and his associate are writing about is how can we explain that a country like Sweden, who have very strong trade unions, where the majority of the people, because Svalfors have done opinion polls or surveys for 20 years, what the Swedish people think about the kind of welfare state I showed you before, what we had. Constantly 70-75% support what we had and are against what we get now. Still, how come then that we do all this transformation against the people's will, and also because it's like you have this power resource theory that if you have strong organized interest like trade unions and so on, you cannot do it in such a country, not against the people's will. And they try to explain it in this article. It's quite interesting. Just Google it, it's online. Education is privatized, 20% children private schools, 2/3 of private schools run for profit. Sweden is a deterrent example. I remember that David Cameron in England, when he was Prime Minister, a conservative one, he wanted to look at Sweden to say, can we have a school system like Sweden, tax money put in the hands of profit-making companies? But then they saw the results and oh, no way, conservative government. It's only one, Chile had this system. It was implemented when there was military dictatorship under Pinochet. But they abolished it because they saw that even they who are very unequal. We are the only one now. The only country who's interested in our school system is the United States. Trump's education minister, DeVos, who herself owns a lot of private schools. She's interested in our system. She's the only one. This is only to show, this is a bit back to gender. That here you see that when children are between 0 and 1, it's between here, they are in parents are parental leave. But then here comes that almost 100% are in public childcare or public-private childcare, tax financed, right? And here you see the distribution of what is privately provided and publicly provided, but all is tax money. Here it goes down a little because some children start real school when they're 6 or 7. This is just a summary. I will not say more than that. Apart from finishing off with this, you don't know what the Heritage Foundation is, but maybe Svetlana knows. It is the most right-wing conservative think tank in the United States, and they look upon Sweden as a very good example that I would like to follow. This is what transformation that's going on in Sweden. And can you recognize some of it for Denmark? Or are we the...
Definitely, there's been a huge neoliberal turn, and privatization in general is increasing. So yeah, it's more or less the same story. Inequality is rising also.
But we are very quick when it comes to reforms in Sweden, either way.
So do you still have this high taxes or income taxes? I mean,
No.
no. So
No.
it was simultaneously with degrees of taxes.
Yeah. So income taxes has been cut, and as I said, abolishment of the property tax, wealth tax, and inheritance tax, and so forth. So that is a policy. Privatization, tax cuts, marketization, new public management. If you add to that how the public sector is regulated, much more by new public management principles also. To make a summary. Okay, thank you.